Israel will stand alone. That's the message from the country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, after President Biden made good on his promise not to support an IDF ground incursion into Rafah. Biden says he won't be sending any American bombs either that Israel can use on that southern city in Gaza, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem.
We are now getting word from delegations as well that are trying to negotiate a peace deal between Israel and Hamas that they have all left Cairo with no agreement. Join me now, White House correspondent Mary Alice Park. So, Mary Alice, 3,500 U.S. bombs on hold. Israeli forces have already started moving into Rafah. Clearly, Netanyahu isn't listening to Biden.
Yeah, Kira, the U.S. has been repetitive. They've said over and over that they are not only concerned with the potential civilian death toll if there's a big ground incursion into Rafah, not only worried about a humanitarian crisis there. We know there's over 1 million civilians that have taken shelter into Rafah after having had to flee other parts of Gaza. But the U.S. again today, the White House again today, really saying again that they don't believe a ground incursion into Rafah will help Israel in its ultimate goal of delivering what they said was a lasting defeat of Hamas. We've heard this White House, specifically National Security spokesperson John Kirby, say again this morning that they're concerned a big ground push, a big ground invasion won't deliver that kind of systematic and really precise victory that Israel is looking for. That there are smarter, better ways to do it, essentially. But it was interesting listening overnight to the president. You played a clip of that interview with CNN. The president saying, really admitting that already they know that some U.S. bombs have been used in Gaza, have led to civilian deaths. And clearly, this was a bit of a red line for this president. He is not interested in continuing to send these specific bombs that could be used in Rafah in any kind of ground incursion there. And like you said, they're using this as a point of leverage, a negotiating point, trying to get Israel to change course and continuing to sort of make threats about other points of leverage they could pull, other levers they could pull if, in fact, Israel does go forward with even more of a ground sort of offensive into Rafah. We heard Kirby again today say that the president would, in that instance, also continue to change or think about changing other ways that the U.S. supports Israel. Kira.
So just looking at just the transcript of what John Kirby said, he also said smashing into Rafah, in Biden's view, will not advance that objective, will not get to that sustainable, enduring defeat of Hamas. But as you know, Mary Alice, that Netanyahu has made it very clear that if he doesn't go into Rafah, he can't completely demolish Hamas. So no matter what, it looks like Netanyahu has made up his mind no matter what the president says.
They continue to seem to be at odds. I think that you're exactly right. It was interesting last night and again this morning, we heard the White House point to the fact that they have not seen a major military ground invasion from the Israelis into Rafah so far. More limited strikes. That is still what the United States is hoping for. I mean, clearly what the U.S. is trying to push Israel to do is more precision strikes, more precision work to try to root out the last strongholds of Hamas there in that city and not put so many civilians at risk by a major ground invasion. I mean, really making a distinction in the kind of offensive measure that they would take in this last stronghold. It was interesting, too, that John Kirby, in his call with reporters today, said that he believed a major ground invasion, like you said, he said smashing into Rafah, those were his words, would help Hamas at the negotiating table. It strengthened Hamas's hand at the negotiating table, not Israel's. Reporters sort of pushed back, questioned why that would be. And John Kirby essentially argued that Hamas would be able to tell a twisted story of Israel not having any concern of civilian life and that wouldn't help in these ceasefire negotiations. Kira.
Well, and speaking of negotiations, delegations now left Cairo. I see here all of them left without a deal on a ceasefire. So what does that mean at this point?
hard to be optimistic. I mean, clearly the White House doesn't want to give up all hope. They are still in touch with those who are trying to get folks back to the negotiating table. But I think that in the last few days, we have seen the mood and temperament around those talks really shift from one of pretty good optimism to now not as much, like you said, we know that the CIA Director Burns has come back to the United States, and no deal, of course, to be talked of yet.
All right. Mary Alice Parks at the White House there for us. Appreciate you.